Mary Stuart was Queen of Scotland from the 14th of December 1542 until her forced abdication in 1567. Mary was born on the 8th of December 1542 at Linlithgow Palace, Scotland, to King James V and his French second wife, Mary of Guise. She was said to have been born prematurely and was the only legitimate child of James to survive him. She was the great-granddaughter of King Henry VII of England through her paternal grandmother, Margaret Tudor. Margaret was Henry VIII's older sister, so Mary was Henry VIII's great-niece. On the 14th of December, 6 days after her birth, she became Queen of Scotland when her father died, perhaps from the effects of a nervous collapse following the Battle of Solway Moss or from drinking contaminated water while on campaign. As Mary was a 6-day-old infant when she inherited the throne, Scotland was ruled by regents until she became an adult. From the outset, there were two claims to the regency, one from the Catholic Cardinal Beaton, and the other from the Protestant Earl of Arran, who was next in line to the throne, became the regent until 1554 when Mary's mother managed to remove and succeed him. King Henry VIII of England took the opportunity of the regency to propose marriage between Mary and his own son and heir, Edward, hoping for a union of Scotland and England. On the 1st of July 1543, when Mary was 6 months old, the Treaty of Greenwich was signed, which promised that, at the age of 10, Mary would marry Edward and move to England, where Henry could oversee her upbringing. The treaty provided that the two countries would remain legally separate and, if the couple should fail to have children, the temporary union would dissolve. Cardinal Beaton rose to power again and began to push a pro-Catholic, pro-French agenda, angering Henry, who wanted to break the Scottish alliance with France. Beaton wanted to move Mary away from the coast to the safety of Stirling Castle. Regent Arran resisted the move, but backed down when Beaton's armed supporters gathered at Linlithgow. The Earl of Lennox escorted Mary and her mother to Stirling on the 27th of July 1543 with 3,500 armed men. Mary was crowned in the castle chapel on the 9th of September 1543, with such solemnity as they do use in this country, which is not very costly. Shortly before Mary's coronation, Henry arrested Scottish merchants headed for France and impounded the goods. The arrests caused anger in Scotland, and Arran joined Beaton and became a Catholic. The Treaty of Greenwich was rejected by the Parliament of Scotland in December. King Henry II of France proposed to unite France and Scotland by marrying the young queen to his 3-year-old son, the Dauphin Francis. With her marriage agreement in place, 5-year-old Mary was sent to France to spend the next 13 years at the French court. On the 4th of April 1558, Mary signed a secret agreement bequeathing Scotland and her claim to England to the French crown if she died without issue. 20 days later, she married the Dauphin at Notre Dame de Paris, and he became King Consort of Scotland. In November 1558, Henry VIII's elder daughter, Mary I of England, was succeeded by her only surviving sibling, Elizabeth I. Under the Third Succession Act, passed in 1543 by the Parliament of England, Elizabeth was recognized as her sister's heir, and Henry VIII's last will and testament had excluded the Stuarts from succeeding to the English throne. Yet, in the eyes of many Catholics, Elizabeth was illegitimate and Mary Stuart was the rightful Queen of England, as the senior surviving legitimate descendant of Henry VII through her grandmother, Margaret Tudor. Henry II of France proclaimed his eldest son and daughter-in-law King and Queen of England. In France the royal arms of England were quartered with those of Francis and Mary. Mary's claim to the English throne was a perennial sticking point between her and Elizabeth. When Henry II died on the 10th of July 1559, from injuries sustained in a joust, 15-year-old Francis and 16-year-old Mary became King and Queen of France. In Scotland, the power of the Protestant lords of the congregation was rising at the expense of Mary's mother, who maintained effective control only through the use of French troops. On the 11th of June 1560, their sister, Mary's mother, died, and so the question of future Franco-Scots relations was a pressing one. Under the terms of the Treaty of Edinburgh, signed by Mary's representatives on the 6th of July 1560, France and England undertook to withdraw troops from Scotland. France recognized Elizabeth's right to rule England, but the 17-year-old Mary, still in France and grieving for her mother, refused to ratify the treaty. King Francis II died on the 5th of December 1560 of a middle ear infection that led to an abscess in his brain. Mary was grief-stricken. Her mother-in-law, Catherine de' Medici, became regent for the late king's 10-year-old brother Charles IX, who inherited the French throne. Mary returned to Scotland 9 months later, arriving in Leith on the 19th of August 1561. Having lived in France since the age of 5, Mary had little direct experience of the dangerous and complex political situation in Scotland. As a devout Catholic, she was regarded with suspicion by many of her subjects, as well as by the Queen of England. Scotland was torn between Catholic and Protestant factions. Mary's illegitimate half-brother, the Earl of Moray, was a leader of the Protestant see. She kept her half-brother Murray as her chief advisor. Mary sent William Maitland of Lethington as an ambassador to the English court to put the case for Mary as the heir presumptive to the English throne. Elizabeth refused to name a potential heir, fearing that would invite conspiracy to displace her with the nominated successor. However, she assured Maitland that she knew no one with a better claim than Mary. In late 1561 and early 1562, arrangements were made for the two queens to meet in England at York or Nottingham in August or September 1562. In July, Elizabeth sent Sir Henry Sidney to cancel Mary's visit because of the civil war in France. Mary then turned her attention to finding a new husband from the royalty of Europe. Elizabeth attempted to neutralize Mary by suggesting that she marry English Protestant Robert Dudley, 1st Earl of Leicester. Dudley was Sir Henry Sidney's brother-in-law and the English Queen's own favorite, whom Elizabeth trusted and thought she could control. She sent an ambassador, Thomas Randolph, to tell Mary that if she married an English nobleman, Elizabeth would proceed to the inquisition of her right and title to be our next cousin and heir. The proposal came to nothing, not least because the intended bridegroom was unwilling. Mary had briefly met her English-born half-cousin Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, in February 1561 when she was in mourning for Francis. They next met on Saturday the 17th of February 1565 at Wemyss Castle in Scotland. Mary fell in love with the long lad, as Queen Elizabeth called him since he was over 6 feet tall. They married at Holyrood Palace on the 29th of July 1565, even though both were Catholic and a papal dispensation for the marriage of first cousins had not been obtained. The union infuriated Elizabeth, who felt the marriage should not have gone ahead without her permission, as Darnley was both her cousin and an English subject. Mary's marriage to a leading Catholic precipitated Mary's half-brother, the Earl of Moray, to join with other Protestant lords, including Lords Argyll and Glencairn, in open rebellion. Mary set out from Edinburgh on the 26th of August 1565 to confront them. On the 30th, Moray entered Edinburgh but left soon afterward, having failed to take the castle. Mary returned to Edinburgh the following month to raise more troops. In what became known as the Chaseabout Raid, Mary with her forces and Moray with the rebellious lords roamed around Scotland without ever engaging in direct combat. Moray left Scotland in October for asylum in England. Before long, Darnley grew arrogant. Not content with his position as king consort, he demanded the crown matrimonial, which would have made him a co-sovereign of Scotland with the right to keep the Scottish throne for himself, if he outlived his wife. Mary refused his request and their marriage grew strained, although they conceived by October 1565. He was jealous of her friendship with her Catholic private secretary, David Rizzio, who was rumored to be the father of her child. By March 1566, Darnley had entered into a secret conspiracy with Protestant lords, including the nobles who had rebelled against Mary in the Chaseabout raid. On the 9th of March, a group of the conspirators accompanied by Darnley stabbed Rizzio to death in front of the pregnant Mary at a dinner party in Holyrood Palace. On the night of the 11th to the 12th of March, Darnley and Mary escaped from the palace. They took temporary refuge in Dunbar Castle before returning to Edinburgh on the 18th of March. Mary's son by Darnley, James, was born on the 19th of June 1566 in Edinburgh Castle. However, the murder of Rizzio led to the breakdown of her marriage. Immediately after her return to Jedburgh, she suffered a serious illness that included frequent vomiting, loss of sight, loss of speech, convulsions and periods of unconsciousness. She was thought to be dying. Her recovery from the 25th of October onwards was credited to the skill of her French physicians. The cause of her illness is unknown. Potential diagnoses include physical exhaustion and mental stress, hemorrhage of a gastric ulcer and porphyria. At Craigmillar Castle, near Edinburgh, at the end of November 1566, Mary and leading nobles held a meeting to discuss the problem of Darnley. Divorce was discussed, but a bond was probably sworn between the lords present to remove Darnley by other means. It was thought expedient and most profitable for the Commonwealth. That such a young fool and proud tyrant should not reign or bear rule over them, that he should be put off by one way or another, and whosoever should take the deed in hand or do it, they should defend. Darnley feared for his safety, and after the baptism of his son at Stirling and shortly before Christmas, he went to Glasgow to stay on his father's estates. At the start of the journey, he was afflicted by a fever, possibly smallpox, syphilis, or the result of poison. He remained ill for some weeks. In late January 1567, Mary prompted her husband to return to Edinburgh. Mary visited him daily, so that it appeared a reconciliation was in progress. On the night of the 9th to the 10th of February 1567, Mary visited her husband in the early evening and then attended the wedding celebrations of a member of her household, Bastien Pages. In the early hours of the morning, an explosion devastated Kirk Field. Darnley was found dead in the garden, apparently smothered. There were no visible marks of strangulation or violence on the body. Bothwell, Murray, Secretary Maitland, the Earl of Morton and Mary herself were among those who came under suspicion. Elizabeth wrote to Mary of the rumors. By the end of February, Bothwell was generally believed to be guilty of Darnley's assassination. Lennox, Darnley's father, demanded that Bothwell be tried before the Estates of Parliament, to which Mary agreed, but Lennox's request for a delay to gather evidence was denied. In the absence of Lennox and with no evidence presented, Bothwell was acquitted after a 7-hour trial on the 12th of April. A week later, Bothwell managed to convince more than 24 lords and bishops to sign the Ainsley Tavern Bond, in which they agreed to support his aim to marry the Queen. Between 21 and the 23rd of April 1567, Mary visited her son at Stirling for the last time. On her way back to Edinburgh on the 24th of April, Mary was abducted, willingly or not, by Lord Bothwell and his men and taken to Dunbar Castle, where he may have raped her. On the 6th of May, Mary and Bothwell returned to Edinburgh. On the 15th of May, at either Holyrood Palace or Holyrood Abbey, they were married according to Protestant rites. Originally, Mary believed that many nobles supported her marriage, but relations quickly soured between the newly elevated Bothwell, created Duke of Orkney, and his former peers, and the marriage proved to be deeply unpopular. Catholics considered the marriage unlawful, since they did not recognize Bothwell's divorce or the validity of the Protestant service. Both Protestants and Catholics were shocked that Mary should marry the man accused of murdering her husband. The marriage was tempestuous, and Mary became despondent. 26 Scottish peers, known as the Confederate Lords, turned against Mary and Bothwell and raised their own army. Mary and Bothwell confronted the Lords at Carberry Hill on the 15th of June, but there was no battle, as Mary's forces dwindled away through desertion during negotiations. Bothwell was given safe passage from the field. The Lords took Mary to Edinburgh, where crowds of spectators denounced her as an adulteress and murderer. The following night, she was imprisoned in Loch Leven Castle on an island in the middle of Loch Leven. Between 20 and the 23rd of July, Mary miscarried twins. On the 24th of July, she was forced to abdicate in favor of her one-year-old son James. Murray was made regent, while Bothwell was driven into exile. He was imprisoned in Denmark, became insane, and died in 1578. Elizabeth, as she had wished, concluded the inquiry with a verdict that nothing was proven against either the Confederate Lords or Mary. For overriding political reasons, Elizabeth wished neither to convict nor to acquit Mary of murder. There was never any intention to proceed judicially. The conference was intended as a political exercise. In the end, Murray returned to Scotland as regent and Mary remained in custody in England. Elizabeth had succeeded in maintaining a Protestant government in Scotland, without either condemning or releasing her fellow sovereign. In Fraser's opinion, it was one of the strangest trials in legal history, ending with no finding of guilt against either party, one of whom was allowed to return home to Scotland while the other remained in custody. On the 26th of January 1569, Mary was moved to Tutbury Castle and placed in the custody of the Earl of Shrewsbury and his formidable wife Bess of Hardwicke. Elizabeth considered Mary's designs on the English throne to be a serious threat and so confined her to Shrewsbury's properties, including Tutbury, Sheffield Castle, Sheffield Manor Lodge, Wingfield Manor, and Chatsworth House, all located in the interior of England, halfway between Scotland and London and distant from the sea. She was occasionally allowed outside under strict supervision, spent 7 summers at the spa town of Buxton, and spent much of her time doing embroidery. Her health declined, perhaps through porphyria or lack of exercise. By the 1580s, she had severe rheumatism in her limbs, rendering her lame. In May 1569, Elizabeth attempted to mediate the restoration of Mary in return for guarantees of the Protestant religion, but a convention held at Perth rejected the deal overwhelmingly. Norfolk continued to scheme for a marriage with Mary, and Elizabeth imprisoned him in the Tower of London between October 1569 and August 1570. In 1571, Cecil and Walsingham, at that time England's ambassador to France, uncovered the Ridolfi plot, a plan to replace Elizabeth with Mary with the help of Spanish troops and the Duke of Norfolk. Norfolk was executed and the English Parliament introduced a bill barring Mary from the throne, to which Elizabeth refused to give royal assent. In 1584, Mary proposed an association with her son, James. She announced that she was ready to stay in England, to renounce the Pope's bull of excommunication, and to retire, abandoning her pretensions to the English crown. She also offered to join an offensive league against France. For Scotland, she proposed a general amnesty, agreed that James should marry with Elizabeth's knowledge, and accepted that there should be no change in religion. Her only condition was the immediate alleviation of the conditions of her captivity. James went along with the idea for a while, but eventually rejected it and signed an alliance treaty with Elizabeth, abandoning his mother. Elizabeth also rejected the association because she did not trust Mary to cease plotting against her during the negotiations. In February 1585, William Parry was convicted of plotting to assassinate Elizabeth, without Mary's knowledge, although her agent Thomas Morgan was implicated. On the 11th of August 1586, after being implicated in the Babington plot, Mary was arrested while out riding and taken to Tixall Hall in Staffordshire. In a successful attempt to entrap her, Walsingham had deliberately arranged for Mary's letters to be smuggled out of Chartley. Mary was misled into thinking her letters were secure, while in reality they were deciphered and read by Walsingham. From these letters it was clear that Mary had sanctioned the attempted assassination of Elizabeth. 209. Mary was moved to Fotheringhay Castle in a 4-day journey ending on the 25th of September. In October, she was put on trial for treason. She protested that she had been denied the opportunity to review the evidence, that her papers had been removed from her, that she was denied access to legal counsel, and that as a foreign anointed queen she had never been an English subject and thus could not be convicted of treason. She was convicted on the 25th of October and sentenced to death, with only one commissioner, Lord Zouche, expressing any form of dissent. At Fotheringhay, on the evening of the 7th of February 1587, Mary was told she was to be executed the next morning. She spent the last hours of her life in prayer, distributing her belongings to her household, and writing her will and a letter to the King of France. She was blindfolded by Kennedy with a white veil embroidered in gold, knelt down on the cushion in front of the block on which she positioned her head, and stretched out her arms. Her last words were, "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit." Mary was not beheaded with a single strike. The first blow missed her neck and struck the back of her head. The second blow severed the neck, except for a small bit of sinew, which the executioner cut through using the axe. Afterwards, he held her head aloft and declared, "God save the Queen." At that moment, the auburn tresses in his hand turned out to be a wig and the head fell to the ground, revealing that Mary had very short, grey hair. Mary's request to be buried in France was refused by Elizabeth. Her body was embalmed and left in a secure lead coffin until her burial in a Protestant service at Peterborough Cathedral in late July 1587. Her body was exhumed in 1612 when her son, King James VI and I, ordered that she be reinterred in Westminster Abbey in a chapel opposite the tomb of Elizabeth. Thanks for watching. Subscribe my channel for more videos.